Yo dudes, Impulse here, welcoming you back to another subscriber Sun and Moon Wi-Fi battle. Today's battle will be against DarkUmbreon, whose links will be down in the description as always, and if you want to be a chance to be featured in one of these, go ahead and follow me on Twitter. Links are down in the description. So as for teams, you can see that I've got a Klefki, a Vikavolt, a Toxapex, a Xurkitrey, a Garchomp and a Chansey. And my opponent's got a Lucario, a Ninetales, a Talonflame, a Klefki, a Dragonite and an Umbreon. So I'm interested to see how that Talonflame holds out considering the nerfs it's received. Anyway, let's get into the battle. We can see that I am challenged by Trainer Dark. Dark sends out Lucario, and I'm going to send out Klefki. I'm going to lead off with a Reflect since most Lucarios are physical. I kind of predicted a switch, but my opponent actually goes for a Sword Dance. So I know that I've got to take care of this thing pretty quickly, else it's going to become a big threat. I decide to go for the T-Wave and it connects. One thing that really annoys me about this generation is Thunder Wave missing. Thankfully this turn the paralysis kicks in and my opponent's not able to do anything. So I decide that I'll switch out, because I need to make short work of Lucario. I go into Garchomp, but my opponent has the Mega Lucario. I was a little surprised by this but let it slide, and thankfully he's paralysed again. Garchomp's Choice Scarf, and I'm going to go for the Rock Slide, predicting a switch into either Dragonite or his Talonflame, but he actually stays in and gets a close combat off on me. It does huge damage and now I'm going to have to switch out again. I want to preserve Garchomp. Since I'm Choice Scarf, I can't afford to stay in. I go out into Toxapex, and my opponent uses Extreme Speed. Considering my defense, it does some decent damage. So my opponent decides he's going to fodder his guy off, stays in again, goes for another close combat. After the couple of defense drops that I said, I'm going to fire off a Scald. We get as much damage on this thing as I can, and it does a nice amount. Leaves him on very low HP. So I'm going to take the next turn recovering up. My opponent goes for something, but unfortunately for him, he's paralysed and I get a free recover up. So I decide I'm going to take this thing out now, but unfortunately Shadow Claw gets a crit. And that is going to be very annoying after we've just recovered all our HP up. Fortunately we have got Regenerator, so it's not that big of a deal. The Reflect wears off and my opponent brings out Dragonite. Not wanting him to set up some Dragon Dancers, I'm going to switch out and I go into Klefki. But his Dragonite's actually a special set, so he uses the T-Ball and Klefki takes it nicely. Klefki is able to then get up a light screen, and that's going to make Dragonite's attacks all that much weaker. Dragonite goes for a Fire Blast, but he's not able to do too much. So my opponent decides to switch out into his own Klefki. Unfortunately I happened to use Toxic that turn, but oh well. So I'm going to have to switch out now because I can't really do anything to this guy, and I go out into Xurkitrey. My opponent actually goes for Substitute. And I don't think I've seen a Substitute on a Klefki for a long time. So my opponent's going to go for a Toxic. Obviously that Pranks is putting in a lot of work right now, and I'm just going to have to stay in to break the sub. I go for the Thunderbolt, and that's going to obliterate the sub with ease. So I'm guessing this turn he's going to put another Substitute up to keep on this little shenanigans. But I decide to switch out into Chansey. Klefki actually goes for Protect, so we've seen 3 out of the 4 moves now. So that doesn't worry me anymore, as Toxapex can stall his Pokemon out. He goes for a Toxic, but I'm not bothered about that in the slightest. Chansey's going to go for Aromatherapy. We're going to clear off both sets of poison, and now we're looking quite healthy. I'm going to switch out into Toxapex, knowing that he can't actually do anything to it. And he reveals his final move, which is Play Rough. Obviously doesn't do much damage. So my opponent decides he's going to switch and goes out into Dragon Knight. It's a little unfortunate for me as I try trapping his Pokemon in with Infestation, but dead Dragonite's the target of Infestation instead. The light screen wears off and I'm going to take this turn to Baneful Buncod and do a little bit more damage with the Infestation that's ongoing. So I know I've got to switch out this turn and there's no better Pokemon to switch out to other than Chansey. So I bring Chansey in so it can take any hit that he wants to throw out. He uses a Thunderbolt, obviously not going to do anything at all, but he does get the paralysis. So he withdraws his Pokemon and goes into Umbreon, which is perfect considering I use Toxic. Synchronize fails to activate because we're already paralysed, so that kind of plays against him there. So I can't really do anything to Umbreon, so I'm going to have to switch out, and I go out into Vikavolt. Umbreon goes for the payback, I guess to get some physical damage on Chansey, but it's not going to do a great deal of damage after we've switched out. Looking at his team, I realise that there's nothing to fear. I'm going to go straight for the Bug Buzz and see how much damage I can get on this thing. If he wants to switch out, then that's fine too. My opponent actually stays in and is faster than us, so he gets his payback off, which we know doesn't do very much at all. After that, we fire off the Bug Buzz and it's going to completely annihilate the Umbreon. So we're looking in a strong position right now, and my opponent's going to have to pull something out of the bag to try and get this thing going. He goes into the Klefki, which we already know is walled by the Toxapex, so I go out into the Toxapex and Toxic is unable to do anything. He goes for a Protect as we try to lock him in with Infestation again. I consider going for Scald this turn, but decide to go with Infestation after all. We get some terrible damage off on Ninetales, but we're going to be able to get a turn or two of chip damage with the effect of Infestation. After looking at the team, I decide to not waste any time and I go straight out into Chansey. Ninetales actually Calm Minds, but even with 6 Calm Minds I don't think it would have mattered too much. Chansey is too fat and he's not going to be able to do anything to me. So my opponent uses another Calm Mind, getting his attack up. And I'm going to go for a Toxic. I'm going to start wearing this thing down real quick. My opponent decides it's time to attack after he's received his +2, and he goes for a Hidden Power. I'm not sure what Hidden Power it is, but it doesn't do too much, and he reveals that his item is Shell Bell. My chance is packing Flamethrower, so I'm just going to use it to chip away a little bit more damage on Ninetales. That plus the poison is going to start racking up real quick. My opponent goes for an Ice Beam as it's stabbed, and he's got a chance to get the freeze, but again it doesn't do too much. That leaves me able to use another Flamethrower. It's going to do some nice chip damage, and that poison is now racked up to a point where I can freely recover. So my opponent goes for an Ice Beam yet again. doesn't do too much, and we are able to get a recover off once more with Soft Boiled. Wanting to be at the maximum amount of HP, I decide to go to Soft Boiled once more, as my opponent goes for an Ice Beam. He goes out into his Dragonite and decides to use a Fire Blast. Chansey's just going to fire off another Toxic to start wearing this guy down, but my opponent becomes a little disheartened and decides to forfeit the match. So GG Umbreon. Unfortunately we didn't get to see the Talonflame in action, so maybe next time. Well, that's it guys. If you've enjoyed this video or learnt something useful, why don't you meet and mash that like, share and subscribe buttons, and I will see you guys in the next one. Laters.